Good morning. We are going to talk about today how to find the complex roots using the square root property. The first couple examples of problems is I want to be able to show you how to express these complex roots in terms of I. Remember in our conversations as we were studying in the past, we used our perfect squares to break down some of these radicals. We know that we cannot take the square root of a negative number because it is a non-real number, okay? And so we're going to have to use our imaginary perfect squares, -1, -4, -9, -16, -25, etc., to break down these non-real roots. So here's how we do it. We have two examples we want to share. And this is how we do it. This is 8 times the negative square root of -16. So here's how I do it. This will be 8 times the square root of -16. Remember, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to treat this like PEMDAS. Okay, we're going to solve the radical first and then multiply by 8. We know that the square root of -16 is 4i. Okay? And then we're going to multiply it times 8. And so 8 times 4i is 32i. And it is fully simplified. Okay, the next problem we have, this one's a little complex, but we're going to have to use our perfect imaginary squares to break down square root of -8. So here's how we do it. So this is 9 times, and this is how we're going to do it. We're going to use the perfect square. So it'll be square root of -4 times the square root of 2. And the whole reason why we want to use these perfect imaginary roots so that we can take the square root of it. So that'll be 9 times. I know that the square root of -4 is 2i times the square root of 2. Now, the next step is we know that outside of the radical, we have 9 times 2i. We simplify that, and that equals to 18i. And so what we have left is 18i on the square root of 2. All right. Now, the next thing we want to do in this set of problem solving, we want to, first of all, we want to solve the equation. So we're given something like 5x squared equals to -500. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to treat this just like an equation. So the first step is we're going to divide both sides by 5. That's step 1. So we have 5x squared equals to -500. Divide both sides by 5. And so what I have here is x squared equals to a -100. The idea is just like when we solve any equation, we want to solve for x. So we automatically know that when we get to this point, in order to solve for x, we got to get rid of the x squared. Now we know that the opposite of x squared is square root of x. So we're going to have to solve the square root of x. So we have x squared equals to -100. So if I take the square root of the matter, the square root of x squared is x. The square root of 100, -100, is plus or minus 10i. Now, where does that come from? That comes from its conjugate. So really, what we're saying is we're saying 10i and -10i. They're conjugates to each other. That's where the plus or minus 10i comes from. Okay? Let's do another problem. Next problem we want to do is we want to do one where we have something like this. We have something like 4x plus 4x squared plus 16 equals to 0. Well, the first thing we want to do is we're going to solve the equation. So the first step is we're going to subtract 16 off on both sides of the equal sign. So I have a 4x squared equals to a negative 16. Next step, what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve for x. And so the next step is we want to get x squared by itself. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. And so what we have is 4x squared divided by 4 is just x squared. Negative 16 divided by 4 is negative 4. So now we have an equation set up, x squared equals to negative 4. And now we're going to use again this idea called the square root property of equality. And so what we're going to do, in order for us to solve for x, we got to take the square root on both sides. So the square root of x squared is x. The square root of negative 4 is 2i. So what we have is x equals to plus or minus 2i. Now, when we expand this further, what we're seeing is its conjugate. So we're given x equals to 2i or x equals to negative 2. All right. The last equation we want to look at to solve is where we use what is called the quadratic formula. And the problem we're going to use is x squared plus 2x plus 3. To do that particular problem, first of all, we're going to need to know the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. This is called the quadratic formula. So what we're going to do is we're going to label the quadratic formula by its terms. This is the a term, this is the b term, this is the c term. That's the first step you want to do. And you're going to use the coefficient for each one of these terms. The coefficient means it's the number in front of the variable. So we're going to use those to plug in. Now keep in mind, when I plug in numbers in place of a, b, and c into this quadratic formula, you need to have parentheses with them. So here's what that looks like. So that's going to be x equals to negative b, and b is 2, and I'm going to put it in parentheses, and I'm just following the formula. Plus or minus, my b squared is 2 squared. Notice I put this 2 in parentheses because I'm substituting in place of the letter b. Minus 4 times 1, that's a 1. Even though the 1 is not there, it's a 1. Times 3, c. And I'm going to divide all of this by 2 times 1. Now, the next step is I'm going to simplify all of this. So this is going to be x equals 2, so negative times 2 is just negative 2, plus or minus. Notice we're talking about the conjugate, so that means we're going to have a solution set for both of these, for this problem. And one is going to be one answer, and the other going to be the conjugate of it. So that's going to be the square root of 2 squared, which is 4. Then I'm going to use the subtraction sign as part of the sign of the number. So negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. So I'm going to put minus 12 here, all divided by 2. 2 times 1. Then the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify what's under the radical. So that's going to be equals to negative 2. I'm going to put my plus or minus, because remember I got to have a conjugate for my solution set, which means that's two answers. Plus or minus the square root of -8, all divided by 2. All right, now, next thing I want to do is I'm going to use PEMDAS. I'm going to take the square root of -8 first. And I'm going to put that over here so everybody can kind of see how this plays out. Now, I don't have a perfect imaginary square to deal with this -8. So I'm going to have to expand it, break it down. So what I have is x equals 2. And I'm going to rewrite the bottom part of this problem. So I have -2 plus or minus the square root of -8 divided by 2. So first step is I'm going to have to break down the -8. So that's going to be x equals to -2 plus or minus, use my perfect square, -4, times square root of 2. That'll give me my -8, all divided by 2. Now the next step is I'm going to take the square root of -4, which is 2i. So that's going to be x equals to -2 plus or minus. Keep in mind I got to have a conjugate for an answer, two answers, 1 plus, 1 minus, plus or minus 2i, because I know the square root of -4 is 2i, times the square root of 2. And I'm going to divide all of this by 2. All right, now, here's the next phase of this. Really what I'm doing is this. What I'm really doing is I'm taking -2, I'm dividing it by 2. I'm going to put my plus and minus sign there. And then I have a 2i on the square root of 2, and I'm going to divide it by 2. That's really what I'm doing here. -2 divided by 2 is -1. So that's a -1 plus or minus. -2i divided by 2 is just I on the square root of 2. So my answer really breaks down to this. So my answer is going to be really x equals to -1 plus I on the square root of 2, or it's going to be x equals to -1 minus I on the square root of 2. Remember, with these type of quadratic equations, we have two solution sets, or two answers for x. One is going to be the positive, one is going to be the minus. And as you can see with this particular solution set, we have x equals to -1 plus I on the square root of 2, and the other answer is going to be -1 minus I on the square root of 2. And there you have it, folks. If you have any questions, come see me. Thank you.